Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're tracing the truly awe-inspiring journey of a single breath, literally from the atmosphere all the way down into your cells. And once we understand how it all works normally, we're going to stress test this delicate biological system in the world's most extreme environments. So let's dive right in.
But before we even get into the mechanics of breathing, consider this absolute jaw-dropping scale. Your lungs contain roughly 700 million microscopic air sacs called alveoli. If you were to spread them all out, they'd cover a massive 145 square meters of surface area. That is a whole lot of real estate, all meticulously engineered just to keep you alive and fuel your vital force.
Section 1. The mechanics of breathing.
Let's start at the very beginning of the journey by looking at how we actually pull air from the outside world into this massive biological machine. You see, breathing is really all about pressure gradients. Inspiration is an active process. Your diaphragm flexes and flattens, which expands your chest to create a literal vacuum that sucks air in. But normal expiration during quiet breathing, that's entirely passive. Your muscles just relax, and the elastic recoil of your lung tissue springs right back into place, forcing the air back out. Now, to keep those lungs properly inflated, they're actually held against your inner chest wall by the surface tension of pleural fluid. This fluid creates a negative intrapleural pressure. It acts exactly like that powerful suction you feel when you try to pull two wet glass slides apart. Without this incredible suction, the lung would just entirely collapse away from the chest wall, which is a very dangerous condition known as a pneumothorax.
When we measure these mechanical breaths using diagnostic spirometry, we look at specific volumes and capacities. Think about your breathing right now as you're listening to this. That quiet breath, that's your tidal volume. It's just 500 milliliters of air moving during a normal, quiet breath. But compare that to the massive 6 liters of total lung capacity you've got on standby for maximum exertion. It's an absolutely incredible reserve system we carry around.
Section 2. The Great Gas Exchange.
So, now that we've mechanically pulled that fresh air inside, the journey continues at the microscopic respiratory membrane for what I like to call the Great Gas Exchange. This exchange happens through simple, passive diffusion, driven purely by partial pressure gradients. Oxygen relies on a pretty massive pressure gradient to force its way into your blood. But carbon dioxide? Well, it is a staggering 20 times more soluble in your plasma than oxygen. This means it can diffuse out of your blood and into the alveoli incredibly fast, even with barely any pressure push at all.
To keep this whole thing in perfect harmony, your body uses localized traffic cops, a process called ventilation-perfusion coupling. Basically, if an alveolus has low oxygen, the local blood vessels instantly constrict, shunting blood away to better ventilated areas. Conversely, if carbon dioxide builds up, the bronchioles dilate to clear it out faster. It's this constantly shifting, self-correcting highway where airflow is perfectly matched with blood flow.
Section 3. Blood transit for oxygen and carbon dioxide.
With the gases successfully swapped, oxygen now hitches a ride on your red blood cells for the cellular commute. But your hemoglobin needs to know exactly when to drop off its precious cargo. Enter the Bohr effect. This is a right shift that happens when your active tissues produce acid and heat. That acidity and heat actually act as a chemical signal, telling the hemoglobin to decrease its affinity and drop off that much-needed oxygen exactly where the body is working hardest. Pretty smart, right? Now, carbon dioxide handles its commute quite differently. About 63% of it transforms into bicarbonate right inside the red blood cell. But it can't just stay there. It diffuses out into the plasma, and to maintain electrical balance, a chloride ion instantly rushes in to take its place. This is known as the chloride shift, or quite hilariously, the hamburger phenomenon. And this clever swap allows massive amounts of carbon dioxide waste to travel safely back to the lungs. Once it's back at the lungs, we encounter the Haldane effect. This is a neat little chemical trick where the sudden influx of fresh oxygen loading onto the hemoglobin physically kicks the carbon dioxide off. You see, deoxygenated blood loves to carry carbon dioxide, but the very moment oxygen binds to it in the lungs, the carbon dioxide gets booted out so you can easily exhale it.
Section 4. The brain's control center.
To keep this entire highly complex transit system running 24/7 without you ever having to consciously think about it, we have to look up at the master dispatcher, the brainstem. Breathing is highly compartmentalized here. Your medulla oblongata sets the automatic baseline rhythm. Your dorsal respiratory group runs the quiet breathing, while the ventral group handles forced breaths. Meanwhile, centers higher up in your pons act as the pedals.
The pneumotaxic center acts as a brake for shorter breaths, and the apneistic center acts as an inspiratory gas pedal for deeper ones. They are constantly fine-tuning your ventilation.
But wait, how do these brain centers know when to press the gas or the brake? They rely on chemical alarms called chemoreceptors. Central chemoreceptors in your medulla constantly sample your spinal fluid, ready to ramp up your breathing rate the literal second carbon dioxide levels rise. In fact, this central alarm system is exactly why it burns when you hold your breath. Your brain isn't actually panicking about a lack of oxygen, it's screaming about the buildup of carbon dioxide. Down in your arteries, peripheral chemoreceptors act as an emergency backup, panicking and driving up ventilation if your arterial oxygen ever drops below a dangerous 60 millimeters of mercury.
So, what happens to this beautifully balanced system when it's pushed to the absolute extreme? We've seen how perfectly this machinery functions at rest and under normal exertion. But now we need to execute a stress test. We need to see what happens when the precise mathematics of our physiology are violently disrupted.
Section 5. Pushing the lungs to extremes. Let's leave our comfortable baseline behind and take our lungs into the harsh conditions of deep underwater exploration and high atmospheric aviation. In high-altitude aviation, you face a severe drop in barometric pressure. Even though the air is still 21% oxygen, there simply isn't enough driving pressure to push it into your blood. This causes hypoxic hypoxia, meaning your tissues are basically starving for air, and triggers immediate hyperventilation. On the flip side, deep-sea diving subjects your body to crushing hydrostatic pressure. According to Henry's law, this immense pressure forces dangerous amounts of gas to dissolve directly into your body's liquids and tissues.
And this brings up some severe deep-sea dangers. If a diver goes too deep, that dissolved nitrogen acts as a potent intoxicant in the fatty tissue of the brain. It causes nitrogen narcosis, famously known as the rapture of the deep. And if they ascend too fast, well, that dissolved nitrogen violently bubbles out of their blood, causing agonizing and potentially fatal blockages known as decompression sickness, or as you might know it, the bends.
Even back safely at sea level, this system can break down from acute clinical pathologies. We broadly split these into two categories. Obstructive diseases cause increased airway resistance. Essentially, obstructive means it's incredibly hard to push air out. Restrictive diseases, on the other hand, reduce lung compliance entirely. They physically prevent the lungs from expanding in the first place, meaning you can't pull air in, severely lowering your total lung capacity.
These breakdowns present in some highly specific clinical ways. For instance, in emphysema, you see the barrel-chested air trapping of pink puffers because the delicate alveolar walls are permanently destroyed. Chronic bronchitis brings the long-term inflammation and thick mucus blockages characteristic of blue bloaters. Asthma presents with reversible bronchial hyperresponsiveness and wheezing. And infections like tuberculosis form chronic granulomatous lesions in the lung tissue itself.
All of this brings us to a fascinating life-or-death paradox. If an emphysema patient has chronically high carbon dioxide, their central chemical alarms actually become desensitized. Their brain switches strictly to the peripheral alarms, relying on a hypoxic drive. This means they only breathe because oxygen is low. So, if you treat them with high-flow pure oxygen in an emergency, you satisfy those backup alarms, entirely removing their drive to breathe, which can lead to respiratory arrest. Think about that for a second. If treating a patient with pure oxygen can actually be the very thing that stops their breathing, what other hidden paradoxes are lurking in the delicate physiology of the human body?